When this occurred a few years ago, I was a senior in high school. I was 17 years old, had just relocated to a larger city with my mother's sister after growing up in a tiny town. My mom frequently worked night shifts, so I was a built-in babysitter. It was the winter soon before Christmas, so by around 5 p.m. it was virtually pitch black outside. This occurred at around 9 p.m. I was home alone with my sister, who was 3. My sister and I used to stay up late together, and she would fall asleep on the couch next to me. I would move her to her room after she fell asleep and help eliminate fits over bedtime. We were laying on the couch when our dog started to freak out. Our dog was a large, floppy basset dog named Matilda. Although she was wonderfully gentle and hardly ever barked, she is now growling, and her fur is standing up on her back. I grabbed up my sister and took her to the bathroom, which had no windows, as soon as I realized something was horribly wrong. I placed her in the bathtub, instructed her not to get out, locked the door from the inside, and then closed it before returning to the living room. Once my sister is safe and sound, I return to the living room. When someone starts pounding on my door repeatedly, I grab my phone to call for help if necessary. When I look through the peephole, I see a man standing outside with his face covered in blood. Matilda is still going nuts, and she's trying to push me away from the door, all while my heart is pounding in my ears and it feels like my stomach is about to do flips. The banging grows louder, and I start to hear voices yelling, and this guy is pleading with me to open the door. I have no idea what to do, so I walk away from the door and just stand there, terrified. I glance through the door in the peephole once more and see another man pounding the man covered in blood. At this moment, I'm a small, vulnerable 17-year-old girl, and there are 2 seemingly large men outside, one of which is beating the other, who is covered in blood, as he's begging me to let him in my house. Finally, I dialed 911. I provide the necessary details while trembling uncontrollably, and they dispatched police, fire, and ambulance. I genuinely doubt I spoke clearly during that phone call, and I'm surprised they were able to pinpoint my address. Once the scene has been dealt with, a police officer knocks on my door. My dog is still acting out. My toddler sister is locked up in the bathroom crying uncontrollably, and I feel like I'm about to pass out from the amount of adrenaline pumping through my body. I open the door for them, and part of the front of the door is covered in blood from the man who was hurt. We later learned the bloody guy was jumped a block or 2 away and was beaten pretty badly. He made a run for it and made it to my house, where the attacker caught up with him. My dog finally calmed down enough to allow the police officers inside, and they assisted me in removing my sister from the restroom. Then they take my statement about the entire incident, phone my mom at work to let her know what occurred, and stay with my sister and I until she comes home. It goes without saying that my mom, my sister, and I all slept in my mom's room that night. Looking back, I realized the hurt guy wasn't trying to scare me or my sister. Instead, he was simply trying to get help. Nevertheless, I felt terrible for not letting him in, even though it was the right thing to do. So I'm a male nurse at a large hospital in San Francisco. I work in the ER. As is customary on Christmas night, it was very busy. My wife is also a nurse for the same hospital, and she works in labor and delivery. There are sweet babies being born left and right, and people are coming into the ER. We hadn't had a chance to take a break together, as we try to do every shift. So when she called, I figured it was to say she wanted to meet up for a bite to eat in the cafeteria. When I answered, I heard in the background a male voice screaming profanities, and my wife, while she is trying to calm this guy down, She informed me that their pager was broken and they required security immediately. I hurriedly hung up the phone, called security, informed my colleagues and nurses of the situation, and ran to labor and delivery since I was so anxious for my wife. When I turned the corner, I almost smacked into this visibly angry man. He wasn't huge, but he definitely worked out, and he was covered in prison tattoos. It was obvious that he was part of a gang, and I work out regularly, but I knew that this guy could take me easily. He looked at me, gave me this sick grin, and then charged towards me, spouting off in Spanish. I don't speak fluent Spanish, but what I could understand scared the crap out of me. I'm backing off as fast as I can, and I start buzzing the door to the ER frantically for them to let me in. This guy is literally a foot away from me, and the door opens and I'm pulled into safety by a doctor. The maniac punches the door a few times before making a dragging sign across his throat while grinning at us both. And the next thing I know, the police rush into the corridor that he's in, and it takes 2 security officers and 2 cops to subdue this dude. I finally make it to my wife, who thankfully was shaken up but unhurt. She explained to me what happened that made this man so irate. A young girl, only 14, came in with a high fever, vomiting, distended belly, and the guy claimed to be her brother, and they needed to cut her open and get her baby out. They did an ultrasound, and to their horror, they realized that she wasn't pregnant at all, but she had bags of drugs in her stomach. It was very common for drug mules to bring young women from Mexico carrying drugs that way, and the man freaked out when they informed him that his sister needed emergency surgery and he was not getting the drugs back. The girl survived, but will sadly end up being deported once she recovers. Let this be a cautionary tale to stay the hell out of Alachua, Florida rest stops. I'm a proud Floridian, and at the time of this story, in early 2000s, I was going to college in South Florida and lived with my family in my hometown in the Florida Panhandle. It's about a 7-hour drive up through Central Florida to get in between the two places. I usually only went home for the holidays due to the drive. It was Christmas in my junior year, and I was ecstatic that I had managed to rearrange my midterms to be able to leave campus ahead of the crowds and beat the masses of traffic. I set off on my journey around 5:30 after a quick dinner with my roommates before leaving for the holidays. At around 10 p.m., I just passed the 2/3 mark, where I always stopped at this little mom and pop's type of diner by the side of the highway to grab a snack, use the restroom, and call my dad to let him know I was okay. I usually did this as I didn't have a cell phone yet. I hadn't been this way since summer, and the place had gone out of business. I was a little upset that I wasn't getting my chocolate chip pancakes that I loved, but I just kept going. It was really desolate around this area back then, so when I saw signs for a rest stop in some random town called Alachua, I decided to pull over. I went and parked directly under the streetlight for safety reasons and went to use the restroom, then called my dad. I didn't see anyone there except for a very tired-looking woman who came over and asked me for directions, saying she was with her husband and 2 small children from Virginia, and they had made a wrong turn trying to get to Disney. I left the rest area and was walking back to my vehicle when I saw a beat-up, unmarked, gray work van sitting there by the driver's side of my Honda Civic. I found it to be pretty odd and noticed that it had Florida tags on it, so it could not have belonged to the lady I talked to beside the restroom, as I remember her saying she was from Virginia. I turned around and ran back to where the rest stop was, running into some middle-aged man with 2 boys. He asked if I was okay, and it turned out that it was his wife I had spoken to, as she emerged from the bathroom a second later. I felt comfortable speaking to him. I told him I was afraid due to the van and wasn't sure what to do. He said that he'd go check it out and that I should stay. He left the kids with his wife and showed up to the driver's side of the van. He stood there for a moment before his voice started cracking, but we could hear him yell from where I was, standing, some 100 feet away. He told them, "Excuse me, gentlemen, we already called the police, so I'm gonna have to politely suggest that you get out of here." Then he ran back to us, grabbed his wife and kids, pointed at me, and said, "Come on, let's all get in the vehicle now." I was confused sitting in the back of some stranger's SUV while he went and used the payphone and called the police. Meanwhile, the van rushed to get out of there as fast as possible. The cops got there, and I found out what happened. The man had gone to check on the van, and he could see in it pretty well because I had parked under a streetlight. The first thing he noticed was that all the seats except for the driver's seat had been removed, and there was a guy sitting in the driver's seat and a guy sitting in the back. A tarp laid out and a bunch of other random items back there that he couldn't immediately identify. It seemed that both of them were just sitting there, probably just waiting for victims. It still makes me sick just to think of it. Thanks for watching. And the only thing more disturbing than this would be missing out on more of our videos. Don't forget to subscribe.